Good evening, it's 8 p.m. local time here in Warsaw. I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching the main edition of World News. Prime ministers of two German land states are calling for peace negotiations with Russia. Meanwhile, the opposition candidate for German Chancellor wants to develop a new European order after the war in Ukraine. And what is Kyiv's reaction to all this? We'll talk about it in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. President Zelenskyy announced he will present his victory plan in Ramstein on October 12th. In exactly 1 month, the most important elections in the world will take place. And Hungarians protest against government propaganda in public media. The recent successes of pro-Kremlin parties in the 3 German state elections might have been local, but the anti-war narrative spreads quickly into national politics. The question arises whether next year will see a major shift in German policy towards Ukraine. Meanwhile, the German Christian Democrats call for a contact group on Ukraine comprising London, Paris, Berlin and Warsaw.
The far-right, pro-Russian Alternative for Germany's results in Saxony, Thuringia and Brandenburg has the mainstream parties scrambling. Nobody wants to form a state government with them, but the fallout has already reached the national stage. The prime ministers of Brandenburg and Saxony and the leader of the Christian Democrats in Thuringia sent an open letter to the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. They call for Germany to push for a ceasefire in Ukraine. Such calls are not new in Germany. A sizable part of voters feels that a normalization of the relationship with Russia is necessary. Especially in former East Germany, anti-NATO and anti-American sentiment is rife. That translates to a more pro-Russian attitude, Michael Mayer of Democracy Reporting International told TVP World.
There may be a bit of nostalgia also from the communist times, that there is some connection to Russia. I think we have deeper strata also of German reflexes towards the East, which we have to call colonial, I think, where people feel, Germany and Russia are the big guys, and they should make deals, and the rest should follow.
The direct reason for the opinion piece is that all 3 state politicians need to bring in the BSW. The party of pro-Russian politician Sarah Wagenknecht is crucial to any coalition building, but the call to talk with Russia does reflect changing attitude in Germany about the war, not just in the east of the country, and that could influence the general elections in a year. But the call to negotiate with Russia has not been received well by national politicians. The political leader of the Christian Democrats CDU, Friedrich Merz, said that it would amount to, quote, the end of Ukraine. He, instead, called for an international contact group for Ukraine. He wants Germany, France, the UK and Poland involved. Sarah Wagenknecht herself has reacted to the suggestion of the 3 state politicians with praise. She called it, quote, a smart and original contribution to the debate.
While pro-Russian and anti-war parties gain more support in Germany, uncertainty creeps into Ukraine. Will the Allies continue to support their cause as promised? Our correspondent in Ukraine, Oskar Terzi, has been following this news closely. So, hello, Oskar, good evening. How is Kyiv reacting to reports from the West?
Well, look, this is quite a complicated subject to get into because there are political shifts happening in different directions across Europe. And Kyiv is obviously having to manage this diplomatically, whether that was Slovakia returning a pro-Russian prime minister, whether that's dealing with Hungary and Viktor Orban, whose sympathies with Putin are well established. And these kinds of things which are happening on the domestic level in Germany are obviously going to be concerning for Kyiv, given how important Germany's support has been to Kyiv since the war began. However, similar to what was going on in France during the election campaign, obviously the far-right parties are much closer aligned with Russia than any of the other political constituencies in Europe. But maintaining support for Ukraine has been something that's been pretty important across the board. And you look at some of the parties that have come in, Giorgia Meloni, You look at some of the words that have come out of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, and as soon as these far-right figures come into some position of power, what the reality has been that eventually they have gone along with what the EU has positioned itself towards Ukraine. Now, that might not stay the same forever. That might change over time. Obviously, that's going to be something Kyiv is quite concerned about. But for now, this is a domestic German issue. And really, when you look at the AfD compared to, say, the CDU, the words coming from the main German opposition at the moment will be much more better received here in Kyiv than any idea of forcing a ceasefire on Ukraine. And I think the leader of the CDU's words about you can't redraw the map of Europe above the head of your allies in the east is something that will go down quite well here in Kyiv.
That was us, Kataji, reporting from Kyiv, Ukraine. Thank you so much, Oz, and of course, stay safe. We will present the victory plan, clear, concrete steps towards a just end to the war, Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced. The Ukrainian president is to unveil his plan on October 12th in Germany. It will take place during the meeting of the Rammstein group, created in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
The Ukrainian government is continuing its lobbying efforts meant to secure the permission to use Western long-range missiles against Russia. Some of the countries gathered in the Rammstein group, which coordinates military support for Ukraine, have backed granting this permission. The United States, however, has not. Washington's support is key as it actually possesses these long-range missiles in significant quantities, while most NATO members do not. Securing such weapons is reportedly a key part of President Zelensky's victory plan, which is set to be presented to the Rammstein group next Saturday. The Ukrainian president stressed the need to secure foreign support during his visit to the front lines in the Sumy region.
I know that it is not easy to motivate, especially the personnel in a time of war. I want you to know that we need to motivate the whole world and convince them that Ukrainians can be stronger than the enemy. And it is true. And this Kursk operation. I want you to know that it helped motivate those who gave us support packages with weapons from abroad.
The Sumy region has seen an increase in Russian strikes since the operation in nearby Kursk region began in August. Border villages, which are a frequent target of Russian shelling, have been largely deserted.
Of course, without children, without people, it's kind of sad, because it's not even dark yet, and at 6 or 7 p.m. everything is locked, the lights are off, and you listen to the sound of these drones.
Ukraine faces not only Russian troops. According to sources cited by the Kyiv Post, a small group of North Korean soldiers have been deployed to Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. These have reportedly been engineering troops assisting the Russian armed forces in support roles. At least 20 North Korean soldiers were reportedly killed in Ukrainian strike on Thursday.
And from Ukraine, we turn our attention to another war-torn region of the world. Polish citizens evacuated from Beirut have landed safely in Warsaw, says the country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The intervention comes amidst Israel's bombardment of Lebanon. According to news outlets, Israel's strikes have already killed over 2,000 people in Lebanon and forced over 1.2 million to flee their homes. Apart from picking up citizens of Poland and other countries, the Polish Foreign Ministry has also sent aid packages to Lebanon, which were donated to the country's Ministry of Health. Other countries and charitable organizations are also providing help. The International Committee of the Red Cross has already donated 17 tons of urgently needed healthcare items to Beirut, with more humanitarian aid on the way. Election day in the US is just a month away after 2 National Party conventions to presidential assassination attempts. To presidential and vice presidential debates, the race is still where it started, with the candidates going neck and neck in the polls. And so we go live to our correspondent in New York, Alex Sumliński. Good evening, Alex. What does the American campaign look like in this very final stretch?
Good afternoon, Maciej. Well, it is as busy and as heated as ever. Now, it was just on Friday that U.S. President Joe Biden had some pretty terse words for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because the president said that he wasn't sure if Israel's Prime Minister wasn't holding up a peace plan in the Middle East in order to influence U.S. elections. Now, the U.S. president was commenting on the words which were made by his Democratic colleague, Senator Chris Murphy, who just last week expressed his concerns about Benjamin Netanyahu, not being interested in a peace plan for the Middle East in order to, and in part of the U.S. elections. Now, Saturday, we'll see Kamala Harris visit North Carolina for a briefing on Hurricane Helen. She will also meet with those who have been affected by this disaster. And at 5 p.m. here, local time in the United States, Donald Trump is set to hit the stage in Butler, Pennsylvania, where just in July there was an assassination attempt on his life. He is set to hit the stage with his vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance and also billionaire Elon Musk. Now, when it comes to national polling here in the United States, the latest give Kamala Harris a lead with 49.5%, Donald Trump 46.2%. Now, these polls, they should be seen as a guide, not as an indication as to who will win these upcoming presidential elections, and that is because the United States has an electoral college system, which means that every state has a number of electoral college votes, which are roughly in line with the state's population. There are 538 electoral votes up for grabs, so a candidate must receive 270 of them to win. And I'd just like to remind you that the polls both in 216 and 220 underestimated Donald Trump. Back to you, Maciej.
That was Alex Sumliński reporting from New York. Thank you so much, Alex, for this report. It's the economy, stupid. That was the slogan Bill Clinton used to win the 1992 presidential campaign. And that slogan fits the 2024 election like a glove again. Donald Trump wants to make America great again and fix its economy, but the economy remains strong a month before the election. The question is whether voters really notice it.
With the U.S. economy weathering the worst period of high inflation in a generation, many Americans are frustrated with increasingly high prices.
Price of gas should go down, price of everyday goods for groceries for people. We're fortunate, we're okay, but there are a lot of people less fortunate that are really struggling. I don't know how they're making it.
Fortunately for the average American, things are looking like they're about to pick up again, starting with a staggeringly large number of new jobs created last month.
New jobs report, as you all know, you've been reporting, created 250,000 jobs in September. The expectation was for 150,000 jobs in September, which has far exceeded that number.
This means that the unemployment rate fell to 4.1%, having come close to a three-year high in July at 4.3%. This success, however large it may be, doesn't mean the government should rest on its laurels.
We've got more work to do, though. Keep getting prices down, like more affordable housing, extending what I've done for seniors and lowering prescription drug costs by letting Medicare negotiate the prices, make sure that's available to everyone.
Experts also say that this second win for the U.S. economy is likely to benefit Kamala Harris in her bid to secure the White House for the Democrats. The rough state of the economy for the last 4 years has been one of the main talking points of her rival, Republican candidate and former President Donald Trump. However, with the economy picking back up, he's turning to other points as his main approach to attack Harris, including illegal migration.
In total, during her term, it's not even believable, she let in 13,099 convicted murderers. Some of them had murdered 10 people. Some murdered 7. One murdered 6. I'm looking at these. These are stone-cold killers.
Setting the race for the White House aside, analysts say the outlook for the U.S. economy is very positive, with the Federal Reserve also easing interest rates and experts predicting a quarter-point cut at the next policy meeting in November.
It's a propaganda factory. Under this slogan, thousands of Hungarians came out to protest today in Budapest. The demonstration took place in front of the headquarters of the state television controlled by Viktor Orban. The rally has been organized by the opposition TISA party, whose leader has not been invited to the public media for several hundred days.
Tisha's supporters gathered in downtown Budapest in front of the MTVA's main building. Party officials criticised the public broadcaster for its coverage of events in the country.
We have had enough of the lies. We have had enough of the suppression of the facts. We demand the restoration of a free and independent Hungarian press, and that is why we came here.
The Hungarian government, led by Prime Minister Viktor Orban, has become a frequent target of criticism from many Western politicians and activists.
The situation of the media is very tense. The private media hardly exists and have huge issues with sustaining themselves, while the public media or state-owned media are really in the pockets of Prime Minister Orban.
The criticism has grown stronger after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Hungary implemented fewer sanctions against Russia than other EU states, and Orban maintains some contact with Putin, going against the practice adopted by most other Western nations. US Senator Jeremy Moran is the latest official to issue such criticism after visiting Hungary earlier this week.
Our delegation and many of our congressional colleagues are increasingly concerned by Hungary's deepening and expanding relationship with Russia and the continued erosion of its democratic institutions. Hungary also continues to disregard the concerns raised by its allies and partners about deepening its ties with China. It is in our shared interest for our countries to work closely together. We urge Hungary to listen to the concerns of its allies and to act on them.
The TISA party has been surging in polls in recent months, reaching 36%. It has become the main opposition party. The support for other Hungarian opposition parties has collapsed. Fidesz remains the most popular party in the country, with around 44% of support.
Slovakia wants closer ties with the Kremlin. Prime Minister of Slovakia has decided to travel to Moscow next year to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Who will stop me from going to a peace rally? Asked Robert Fico on Slovak television. He earlier vowed to resume buying oil and gas from Russia after the war in Ukraine. Robert Fico told Slovakian media he sees no issue travelling to Moscow, even in light of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. He also said that he will take part in the commemoration of the 1944 Battle of Dukla Pass on Sunday, when Soviet forces tried to reach Slovak partisans but ultimately failed. For Fico, the offensive for him is a reminder that, quote, freedom comes from the East. Fico is known for his pro-Russian leanings. On Thursday, he said that he will do everything to normalize political and economic relations with Russia once the war with Ukraine is over. This includes the purchase of Russian oil and gas. Fico is meeting with the Ukrainian delegation on Monday to discuss transits through the invaded country. And we're staying in Slovakia as culture war engulfs the country. The Slovak opposition accuses the Minister of Culture of cleaning house and politicizing the ministry. The official propaganda criticizes the LGBTQ movement and promotes cultural exchange with Russia.
The dismissal of the head of the Slovak National Gallery is the latest in a series of personal changes in the country's cultural institutions. The museum's new chief, Anton Bittner, has no track record in the arts and was described as a manager and expert in stabilizing organizations and their development, rather than an appropriate person for the job by critics of his appointment. This latest decision comes after Martina Šimkovičová, the Slovakian Minister of Culture, fired numerous established members of the country's artistic community. Her personnel choices have been criticized by both artist and opposition parties.
Basically, all people who are now nominated by Slovakian Minister of Culture, Madam Šimkovičová, they seem to be not really qualified. They are more political nominees rather than basically people who are chosen by independent committees.
Šimkovičová hails from the far-right pro-Russian SNS party. Since taking office, she has been on a warpath against art and movements that go against her political beliefs, which she deems too liberal. This includes the entire LGBTQ community and alleged countering disinformation. She also decided to resume cultural cooperation with Russia earlier this year. The procedure for granting public funds to independent cultural institutions has also been changed, centralizing control in the hands of the Minister of Culture.
There is no trust to the current leadership of Minister of Culture, and there are really zero information about the reasons why these changes are made, or the reasons which are provided are not very clear. It's also creating a lot of worries.
Funding for cultural projects and institutions is set to be cut overall as well. Critics of Prime Minister Robert Fico's cabinet said the government's war on culture is also an attempt to take attention away from other political issues, such as plans to raise taxes which go against Fico's electoral promises.
What will the EU foreign policy look like under Kaja Kallas? What future awaits NATO? And is Estonia prepared to stop Russian troops in case of an armed conflict? The former president of Estonia, Kersti Kaljulaid, answered these questions and more in an interview with TVP World's Don Arleth.
And it's a great pleasure to welcome to TVP World Kersti Kaljulaid, former president of Estonia. Madam President, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, former Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas is to become the EU foreign policy chief. I'd like to just ask you about this to start off. How do you think this will affect diplomacy from the European Union's perspective?
Well, I am quite sure that it will not particularly affect the diplomacy from the EU's perspective because, of course, Kaja is very competent to take care of all the worries of all the member states in whichever corner of Europe they happen to be. I've understood that some people have been worrying whether Kaja will pay necessary attention to the questions of Africa, etc. But I am quite sure that she is fully competent, extremely enthusiastic and really, really good in international debates, as we have all seen in the last years.
Well, it's great to have a representative from our region as the chief of diplomacy. I think you'd agree.
Not only, we also have the chief of defense, a new territory for the Commission, and the fact that we even have somebody who is responsible for defense issues is extremely important as well. So indeed, we can be very happy and very grateful to Ursula von der Leyen.
Now, Mark Rutte is the new NATO Secretary General. What challenges do you think he faces both in our region and, of course, in dealing with Ukraine?
Well, the challenge is common. We need to spend more on our defense and on helping Ukraine. And as Estonian Ministry of Defense has calculated, annually we have spent only 0.1% of our collective GDPs to support and help Ukraine. Nobody can win a war on peanuts. So we absolutely need to up our support, and this is extremely important job. There is absolutely no other more important task for Mark Rutte. Of course, he himself will face considerable difficulties convincing member states to put up their defense spending, because during his premiership, the 2% level was never achieved. So if you haven't practiced what you now need to preach, this is technically a big problem, but overall I'm quite sure that his skills of negotiation will carry him through also this difficult task.
Now, when we consider potential Russian aggression against a NATO member state, Estonia is one of the first that comes to mind. Are you confident now that due to the forward deployment of a certain amount of troops here in Poland, in the Baltics as well, that actually an attack could be held off long enough for NATO to properly respond to any aggression from the Russian side?
Well, I'm pretty happy about NATO's new strategy, which also because we have been sadly informed by the practices of Russian army in Ukraine, killing, maiming, raping, kidnapping people. Now the plan is that no boots from the attacking army will get to any NATO member states' ground. And this is where we together are spending here at the borders, you, us, quite considerable amounts of our GDP. We plan it to go to 3.5%, and Poland as well is extremely high. So we are clearly doing everything we can ourselves. But of course, we know also that NATO's planning has got better so that we could really feel protected and defended. On the other hand, I would like to take the issue with your conviction, apparently, that Estonia is the most natural place to be afraid and worried. If we look at the current state of play, then Russia is trying intimidation tactics. I mean, poisoning people in UK. There was a military base evacuated in Germany because there were some risks which made people to be concerned about the safety of that base. So we can see that in this hybrid world where we are living, all and out attack is not the only thing which we need to look out for. And these different hybrid issues notably rise more west. And I hope this helps also to understand our Western partners that there is no such thing like forefront nation in the modern day military discussion anymore. So we are all, the whole free world, particularly NATO in Europe, we are collectively at risk, collectively making sure that this risk will not realize. And I think we are doing pretty good.
Now, Estonia has a large Russian minority. Are there fears that this could be used somehow against Estonia in the same way that Vladimir Putin was trying to claim that he was entering Ukraine just to protect the Russian minority or Russian speakers?
Well, as we all know, there was absolutely no truth in his claim that any Russian in Ukraine needed to be defended. So in this sense, we all know that this is a ruse, it's a cover, it was not the real reason. And no Ukrainian Russian-speaking person, sent out a plea to please come and help us living here in Ukraine and suffering from a very difficult situation. As we well know, then both Russian language was well spoken in Ukraine and is still there. But Russian-speaking people in Ukraine are now fighting against aggression, because they want to be part of the free world. Same applies to those people here in Estonia whose first foreign language is Russia. I think they are all very much torn by the fact that the country which they respect as their cultural fatherland is doing horrible things, because they know it is doing horrible things. And there are very few people here in Estonia who the Russians themselves call ždune, or people who are waiting. And most of our Russian-speaking minority definitely is for free world. Another thing, they are not all Russian. As you well know, in Soviet Union, people were circulated from one part of the Union to the other to make sure that everybody becomes Sovietsky человек, Soviet person, and nationalities would not matter anymore. So as soon as things started to go wrong in Ukraine, 1/3 of our Russian speakers stood up and said, we're not Russians, we're Ukrainians actually. So when in Belarus we had people trying to set more democracy into that country's system, another 1/3 got up and said, I have my roots in Belarus. I do not support what is going on right now in that country. So in addition, these people are not Russians. They are just Russian-speaking minority. Of course, our school system is gradually turning also only into Estonian language. So this is the lingua franca in this country. But also, if our children, all nationalities, study together, then their value base is also certainly the same.
I'd like to ask you about the U.S. elections and former President Donald Trump potentially coming back. He says he has a plan to end the war in Ukraine. He can do so overnight. But many people are talking about this concept of Ukraine giving up land for neutrality to have some kind of peace with Russia and Vladimir Putin. I'd like to just get your thoughts on that. Is this something that would be remotely acceptable, or would this be indeed a big danger to the rest of us here on the eastern flank?
Having worked several years, because my presidency coincided with President Trump's presidency, I noticed one thing. He's very compassionate about wars and illegal arms, like chemical arms, for example, harming people in faraway places. And he might react actually quite strongly, thinking of Syria, for example. So first and foremost, I absolutely do not think that it is a done deal, that, Trump will overlook Ukraine's needs and try to settle a deal. He was pretty strong in Eastern Europe in his first term. He was himself in the region. Vice President Pence visited. We had visits to the White House from the Baltic states. So really good contacts. So he knows this region. And I'm quite convinced that it is possible to do, as Mike Pompeo also in Kyiv in Yes conference 2 weeks ago said, to appeal to the classic Republican foreign policy.
Now, strengthening regional security in the context of Putin's imperial ambitions here on the eastern flank, of course, of NATO, do you think that we have pretty much taken care of the direct threats that Russia poses at this point, and that that we're actually in a safe position?
Interestingly, I think we are in a safer position than when this aggression started, because then it was pretty tough sometimes to convince, not necessarily politicians, but also some politicians, but definitely it was tough to convince populations of the Western European nations about what kind of a risk we are facing, all of us in Europe. Now it is considerably easier, and we know that human beings are compassionate and they actually do support. If you look at the polls and surveys in Western European countries, they actually do support the Ukraine's place among free world nations, and therefore politicians have an easier job to convince everybody to continue our strong support.
Madam President, thank you very much for joining us today on TVP World. We appreciate your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all we've prepared for now. Thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more here on TVP World.